Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. With India's COVID 19 cases touching 700,000, increasing at almost 25,000 a day, and with the peak nowhere in sight, are we in danger of losing the fight against the virus? That's the key issue I shall explore today with the former head of epidemiology at the Indian Council of Medical Research, Raman Gangakhedkar. Dr. Gangakhedkar retired 6 days ago on the 30th of June. Dr. Gangakhedkar, as I said in that introduction, you retired 6 days ago on the 30th of June, bang in the middle of a pandemic, which is steadily getting worse. Why did the ICMR let you go? It simply doesn't make sense.
No, they never wanted me to go. They tried their level best, but I was staying alone for last 2.5 years in Delhi. And at this age, staying alone was as difficult as one can imagine. So I promised them that I won't go out of ICMR. I need to go back to the family, and then I will still be connected. So they offered me a chair, which is a prestigious chair of ICMR. That is Dr. C.G. Pandit National Chair. So here I am. And in any case, even if I retire, for me, I don't see how I will not be working.
So the
I will
position is
continue to.
A, they wanted you to continue, but you were keen to retire. You wanted to go back to your family. Secondly, they've given you a chair, so you are now Professor Gangakhedkar, not Dr. Gangakhedkar. And thirdly, you remain connected to the ICMR. Have I understood all three correctly?
That's right. That's right.
In which case, Professor Gangakhedkar, let's talk about the COVID situation facing the country. We're just short of 700,000 cases this morning, the 6th of July. They're increasing by almost 25,000 a day. And this means India is today the third largest, both in terms of daily increases as well as in terms of total cases. And in terms of fatalities, we're eighth. Would you accept the virus is racing ahead and we are not in control of the situation?
I won't make those kinds of statements. What I would say is this is a situation that you are seeing after a very long time being in the outbreak. One has to remember that the virus is highly infectious. It is a respiratory disease and it spreads by droplet infection. The result is you will find that wherever population density is high, the virus is likely to spread very rapidly. In India, when it comes to population density, you will suddenly realize that most of the metropolitan cities would have issues related to high population density. And if you want to reduce the spread, the best thing that we have is use of mask, hand hygiene, and keeping safe distance. Keeping safe distance becomes very difficult in these metropolitan cities. Unfortunately, our metropolitan cities contribute huge number of a population within a given state, and the result is you are likely to find this increase occurring rapidly to begin with. So, to me, numbers, I would say that they have their own place. I'm not saying that increasing numbers is a good thing to happen, but at the same time, when you are lifting lockdown, in phases, you're bound to expect that these numbers would slightly start increasing over a period of time. So, yeah.
Let me stick with numbers for a little moment longer. Recently, I interviewed Ashish Jha, the director of the Harvard Global Health Institute, and he said that if you combine the total number of reported cases with the total number that are unreported or undetected, India is already growing at 50,000 a day, and by August, he said, India is likely to be growing at 200,000, 2 lakh a day. I also interviewed Ramanan Lakshmi Narayan, who is the director of the Washington-based Center of Disease Dynamics, and he says that by September, India could have 200 million cases. Now, you're a distinguished epidemiologist in your own right. How do you respond to these projections?
There is one thing which I would say Projections are good if you understand the disease dynamics well. Second thing, you can make good projections if you know about the disease really well. And the third thing, in the preventive interventions, even if you don't have a vaccine or drug which can affect the transmission dynamics, it is an issue of the preventive measures that you want population to adapt. And if the population is going to adapt at a different rate, if the coverage is going to be different, or if the proportion of people who are going to change their lifestyles to a large extent tends to be different, it would be very difficult to predict. To me, all these numbers, eventually these numbers are good for the moment when you are speaking. As you realize, most often these tend to remain speculative because you need to have assumptions in place. If people want to risk and say that this is going to be their number, that's their choice. But to me, we need to keep on worrying about the increase rather than worrying about those numbers which are predicted by people.
You said a very interesting and important thing there, Professor Gangakekar. You said these numbers are good for the moment when you are speaking. In other words, you're not disputing the projections made by Ashish Jha and Ramanan Lakshmi Narayan. You're simply putting them in context. They're good for the moment when they're speaking. Have I understood that correctly?
Perhaps not. No, what I'm saying is there could be different ways in which you look at those numbers. Now, if you find you talked of two people, those two people may have different numbers if you talk about the same time point. Now, it makes it very difficult to make a choice between who could be correct. Because all these numbers, when you do modeling has lot many assumptions. And when you make assumptions, my assumption could be different than somebody else's assumption.
I understand that. Can I put this to you? Can I put the background against which Lakshmi Narayanan made his projection of 200 million by September? He said the serological survey results that were announced by the ICMR on the 11th of June had said that 0.73% of the population had been exposed to the virus as of the end of April. That means 10 million people had been exposed. Now, over 2 months later, that figure will have doubled or quadrupled, reaching perhaps 40, 50 million. By September, which is 2 months further down the road, it could have doubled or quadrupled again, getting very close to 200 million.
No, don't you think that it's something which is very difficult to predict? By 30th of April, we had lockdown, which was perhaps far more stringent. And then now I'm talking about a situation where the lockdown is being lifted. There are certain states where they're again coming back to lockdown, and those lockdowns are for varying periods. Now, if I was to use all these kinds of assumptions and come out with a number, I'm more likely to be questioned subsequently that my numbers have not been accurate or my numbers have failed to predict it correctly. So I think, what is prudent is we know that this infection is there. If people don't follow the precautions that are expected to be taken by them, if we don't have a good medicine that is available to treat all these people who need hospitalization, I think what would be prudent to do is to think about the situation as something which demands action rather than looking at those numbers and getting worried.
One more question about those numbers. Is it possible that they may be conservative? That the 200 million figure quoted by Lakshmi Narayan or the 2 lakh a day figure given by Ashish Jha may be smaller than what actually happens? Is that also a possibility? I'm not asking to give me a firm answer. Is that also in the range of possibilities?
See, all possibilities tend to exist. If it all depends on the proportion of people who are going to follow these non-pharmacologic interventions and the proportion of people who would perhaps treat, proportion of the states which would say that the lockdown is lifted completely. I am not going to talk and say that there is no possibility of anything, but at the same time I also understand all these predictions tend to be highly speculative. one needs to think about them as only one pointer that the infection is likely to grow at a rapid rate, and we need to take action to ensure that it doesn't reach those levels at all.
Okay, that's perfectly clear. Let's move on. On the 11th of June, the head of the ICMR, Dr. Balram Bhargav, categorically said, and I'm quoting him, India is not in community transmission. Now, outside the government and outside the ICMR, absolutely no one in the country believes it. Now that you've formally retired, although you are still connected with the ICMR, can you speak more freely and tell us what is your personal belief? Are we in community transmission or are we not?
See, if you actually look at what is that staging classification was done at a time when the entire world was going into lockdown, right? Now, what was it that was done? Contact tracing was given primacy. Now, if you give contact tracing as a primacy, you would suddenly find that in a lockdown situation, tracing contacts becomes extremely easy. And then when we did everything at that, one of the strengths that India had, that we had, people may question, people may say that we didn't have a high quality public health infrastructure. But the reality of life is we were among those few countries which had some public health infrastructure which was able to do good contact tracing. And the result was,
Can I
yeah,
interrupt? I understand
yeah.
what you're saying, but the audience will say he's not giving a straight answer. Are
No,
we
I
in
am telling.
community transmission?
I'm
Yes or
I'm
no?
I'm coming to it. I'm coming to it. But it needs some amount of explanation. Why am I saying this? The result is we were able to trace contact, trace from the index cases. We could actually even find out for how they have acquired it. Now, one of the things that is happening is in those population dense areas, you find that you are likely to find that you may not be able to find out who's the contact of this index case. Now, it is possible that in a pocket of, let's say, a city like Bombay or a city like Delhi, you would find that in those pockets of containment zones, people are unable to find out from where they acquired it, probably. The result is you can only call it as localized transmission. When you say community transmission, there is a tendency to say Bombay is into community transmission. Now, that has a different connotation itself, because community transmission would essentially mean predominantly the proportion of cases that you are getting do not know that from the source of infection in that particular city. So it becomes extremely difficult to say whether there is community transmission in Bombay or
Okay.
community transmission in a large metropolitan cities. One may agree to localized transmission occurring in Dharavi, where
Professor
it is
Ganga,
also,
you're
yeah.
making a very neat distinction between localized transmission and community transmission. But you're really claiming, are you, that we have 700,000 cases and we've been able to trace the contact in the vast majority of them? Because people will find that very hard to believe. But you're clearly
No, but
suggesting that.
but that is not the definition of community transmission. Now, one needs to understand one thing. Uh, when you say community transmission, it has geography as its denominator, no, or you are referring to geography. When you say that in India there is community transmission, the geography becomes the entire country, that in India community transmission is occurring. And to make such an observation based on only the number of cases that you have detected, perhaps it would be a little more presumptuous and it would be difficult. And I
Okay.
ask a simple other counter question. Now, please try to tell me whether it is community transmission or whether it is a localized transmission. What kind of strategy is changing? If you look at containment zone also, you are trying the same strategies that you are expected to do, assuming that the outbreak is severe in that particular area. You
Okay.
may refer it to, yeah.
That's a very clear answer. that whether you call it localized transmission or community, the strategy won't change. And secondly, given the geography and the size and scale of India, to say that it's community transmission right across the country is very hard to believe. But you accept that there are pockets of Bombay, pockets of Delhi, maybe now Chennai, and even possibly Bangalore, where there is localized transmission happening. That you do accept. You're nodding, but you're saying yes.
Absolutely.
What then do you say to people like Jayaprakash Muriyal and T. Jacob John? I won't name any foreign epidemiologists. I'm simply talking about two very highly regarded Indian ones, and you know them, I'm sure, very well. Both of them have repeatedly said that community transmission is happening. T. Jacob John says it's been happening since the 18th of March, when a young man went by train from Delhi to Chennai and ended up with the virus. What do you say to them, briefly?
No, I think my answer would essentially remain the same. Even if you take names of people in science, differences in opinion are common. They would also accept, they could criticize me. No, it is not happening in that manner. I think you are wrong. And that's the way science progresses. And I would be happy to even accept if things are different.
Okay.
It all depends on, this is science. In science, we never claim that I am the only one who's right. No, it could be anybody is right. No,
that's perfect.
But we need to debate on that.
Let's move on again. Tens of millions of migrant workers, as you know, have gone back to their villages in rural UP, Bihar, Bengal, Orissa, Telangana, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand. Are you worried that they may have carried the infection with them and you could start seeing surges in rural hinterlands?
No, everybody would be worried. I don't see who would say that migrants, when they return back to their own cities, is not a threat to control of this particular outbreak. I think one has to generally agree.
So there is a fear that we could see a surge of cases in rural India.
That part I cannot. So that's precisely what I'm trying to say. India is such a diverse country. If you actually look at lockdown, the best lockdown that occurred was in rural areas. Now you look at all that was happening at that point in time. You found that villagers, they didn't want anybody from outside to come in their own villages also. They made their own makeshift huts outside where these people were isolated. They were kept there. They somehow managed to even provide them all amenities that they require. And that's the kind of approach that was far more common in rural areas. Actually, if you look at urban areas were one where violations were occurring at that point in time. But rural areas were strong enough. And now if I was to predict that the numbers are going to be far higher there, I need to either undertake a study to find out what proportion is contributed by them, or perhaps, whatever I say will continue to remain speculative and people may say, oh, I was right or wrong.
I understand. Let me then ask you, when do you expect the peak? The last time the ICMR spoke about a peak was on the 3rd of June when Nivedita Gupta said it was far away. Her exact words were very far away. We're now a month further down the road. What do you believe is the estimate time when you expect the peak? When do you estimate it to be?
Now, let me put it the other way. What have we learned from the peaks that we are seeing elsewhere in the world? And you have to remember, India is many countries in one particular place. It's a subcontinent, as we describe. There is huge heterogeneity in terms of even the outbreak in different parts of the country. Now, when you say peaks, today, if you actually look at US data, the peak has most of those who came, the cases came from New York. Now, you just imagine today, of all the metropolitan cities, there are some which are contributing larger numbers. There are some where we continue to see smaller numbers, though at the same time one must recognize that offer of testing may not be uniform all over. Now, if you are to predict a peak, you must also keep at the back of mind that there would be uniform offer for testing and acceptance of testing as well. Now, that is unlikely to happen in India the way we are seeing as of now. Now, if I was to predict the peak would essentially depend on the population sizes of those metropolitan cities. And if the population size is small, if the outbreak is severe in that area, if I'm offering high proportion of people are getting tested, those who require the same, I might find that the peak that it is reached appears to be one which is closer. But is that a reality? We cannot predict that because other cities, other metropolitan cities are yet to contribute.
So are you saying that India will have different peaks at different times in different places?
I wouldn't, yeah, different places, different cities, yes, the peaks will be different at different time points. But when I put the whole graph into India's graph, you will find it will depend on the size of that metropolitan city. When was this offer of testing improved? When was the acceptance high enough in the city? And then the level of outbreak. So it's very difficult to say that today, from here on in 2 months' time, I'm likely to see the peak. No, and you must also remember, if you actually look at what is happening currently, Bangalore again went for lockdown. Now it's another metropolitan city. They went for a shorter lockdown. So essentially, the health strategies to prevent and control are in the hands of the state.
Dr. Ganga Khedkar, I'm interrupting you because you're very clear. You're making it crystal clear that different cities at different times will have different peaks, and therefore it's impossible to talk of a nationwide peak. I only wish your colleagues at the ICMR had explained this to the country. It's a very simple thing to explain. It takes 5 minutes, but they didn't. This confusion and debate and controversy about peaks has been carrying on. There have even been times, forgive me, when the ICMR has actually questioned whether there will be a peak. Love Agarwal actually once said, if we flatten the curve enough, there'll be no peak, which frankly, many of your colleagues laughed at. You're laughing at it just now yourself. Earlier, the ICMR questioned whether there was such a term as community transmission. You haven't questioned it. Why was this honesty not available earlier? Why is it that you now, when you're retired, are being frank and open and explaining to the Indian people, but it wasn't explained earlier by no one?
No, I would disagree there because most often I used to sit in those press conferences also. It all depends on how a question is asked. Now, if I'm asked to explain the reasons why I'm saying, it would be different. Right, but if I'm asked a point blank question, please answer in yes or no. No, then just answer.
Professor Ganga Khedkar, you're a diplomat. The problem is not the answers and the information given by the government and the ICMR. The problem was the questions asked by journalists. Okay.
No, it's like, no, I'm not blaming journalists. Now, what I'm trying to say, it is the nature of question. If you keep the questions open-ended, asking certain question which can be answered in a different way. If you ask me the reason why I think it would be something like this, things could be different. Okay. But if it is yes and no question, there is very little that you can do. You will just answer.
That's a good point. People will differ in their response to it. I've pointed out that people will say, Dr. Ganga Khedkar, forgive me, Professor Ganga Khedkar is being open and fulsome now that he's retired. It's such a shame the ICMR and the government weren't equally fulsome and open earlier, but that's the past. Let's move on. At the end of May, the health minister told the Economic Times, and I'm quoting him, the virus is not that virulent. Is there any scientific basis for claiming that the virus in India is less virulent than in any other country?
No, I don't think there is any, if you are asking biological reason on which I can say that the virus is less virulent, no study has as yet been done. There is no robust evidence across the world, though there are claims that there are certain mutations which are perhaps associated with high transmission efficiency and they may be associated with even lower mortality. the studies, their design is actually not expected to answer this particular question. It only shows that this virus has certain mutations. It's difficult to actually make a categorical statement. Now, one of the things, if there is no biological basis, the only way you can perhaps think about that there is less of mortality here is look at your own data. And if the data tends to suggest that the case fatality rate or infection fatality rate is lower, I think he was making a fair statement that we have not observed high mortality. But that doesn't mean it is going to continue in the same manner in future as well. No, it all.
You come
Yeah.
into an area that I wanted very much to question you about. You're talking about case fatality rate. Maybe in a moment we'll talk about recovery rate. Both of those are terms that the Prime Minister frequently uses to say that India is doing better than other countries. He said that most recently in the speech he made just a few days ago on the 30th of June. I want to discuss both of those with you one by one. Let's first take the mortality rate. India's is 14 per million. The United Kingdom is 651. Italy is 577. Spain is 607. The key question here is how reliable is India's mortality rate? Ashish Jha points out that we don't have a clear idea of the number of people who died of COVID, and we certainly don't have a full idea of the number of
Let me
people who
ask
are
you.
infected. He points out something else as well. He says, so not only is India's mortality rate questionable, but he adds that mortality rates ignore different age demographics in different countries. Therefore, you can't really compare the mortality rate of one country with another. Yet that is precisely what we do all the time when we claim we're doing better. So how valid is this mortality rate comparison between countries?
Now, there is one thing which we have to keep at the back of mind. Now, one thing is, mortality rates would differ based on the age group composition, the proportion of those people belonging to older age group versus others, and it becomes extremely difficult. I agree with him fully that you can't compare India with, let's say, USA, where the survival, in general, lifespan is very high. You find old age population is high, and therefore that may be a variable which influences the case fatality rates as such. So basically, I think I agree with him completely on that particular issue. The second issue, the first one which you mentioned, that it's little lower than what one should expect, and he felt, or whoever, and I would request you one thing: please don't quote people's names. You may ask questions. It becomes very difficult. No, it's embarrassing to counter somebody in public and say, oh, that person did this, he made such a statement. I would not like to hurt them.
What about the point
I will come.
our mortality rate is not reliable because A, we don't have a full count of COVID deaths. There are many that are believed to be missing. And secondly, we don't have a full count of the infections. There are loads that are not taken. And so neither the numerator nor the denominator is correct.
No, please remember, no, it is not a question that perplexes others' minds. It is a question that perplexes us as well. There are missing pieces of information. But does that mean that I would make a statement that this is because we have everything unreliable? No. You need to provide an evidence to that effect to say that deaths are occurring elsewhere, but they are not getting reported. The deaths due to non-COVID illnesses are high enough, and they are also not being reported. You know those statements that we make. When we should have some evidence to state those things. If we want to say that this is not going in an expected manner and then speculate that this may be just because our systems are not capturing death, I need to have evidence to that effect.
Okay.
If that doesn't exist, I trust what I have.
You're making a good
I can't say.
You're making a good point. You're saying, to use your words, we are also perplexed by the figures. We don't have full information. There are missing pieces of information, but that doesn't mean that the mortality rate is unreliable. And we acknowledge that there are deficiencies, but it doesn't mean it's unreliable. Let me then come to the recovery rate. That's the second point the Prime Minister is constantly talking about. Now, as of today, India's recovery rate is 60.9%. Italy's is 79.5%, Spain is 70%, and those are countries that have had huge levels of death. Now, I want to put this to you. First of all, this suggests you can have a pretty good recovery rate and a very worrying mortality rate as well. A lot of deaths, in other words, is what I mean. Recovery rates doesn't mean you don't have deaths. And secondly, practically every epidemiologist I've spoken to, and I won't take names, says that at the end of the day, 2 or 3 years down the road, when all the infection and cases are known and when all the deaths are known, all countries will have probably the same recovery rate and it's likely to be 99%. So once again, how meaningful is it for India to be proud of our recovery rate and make it seem we're doing better than the rest of the world?
No, I'm sorry. Just to remind you, took name of Prime Minister. No, there was no reason. No, you could have asked me a simple question.
I apologize. That sir, the Prime Minister made a speech on the 30th of June and the country heard it. But you're right. I withdraw the PM's name. Please answer my question without the PM's name.
No, let me put it. I agree with what they have stated. All countries eventually will have recovery rates which will be closer to, let's say, 99%. I know whatever number which is closer to 100% that you are likely to see. But to me, to compare, if you, the way perhaps we were looking at that issue, to say that, Italy had a higher recovery rate, perhaps may not be very fair, because in Italy, the outbreak is mature outbreak. Whereas if you look at India, in India it continues to be evolving. In Italy, you have, if you plot the graph, it's on the Gaussian curve, it's going down. And that shows that the outbreak has been matured. And whereas in India, you just see it shooting up at this point in time. It's an evolving outbreak. So comparison cannot be made. Since you referred to his statement, one of the things which is important is to, when people hear gloom, the atmosphere is gloomy, people are fearing about the deaths that could occur in COVID-19. One needs to talk about positive things that happen.
I understand.
And positive things is recovery.
I understand, sir. As you're suggesting, Hausla Dena is a very important thing in a pandemic. You need to keep spirits up. You need to keep confidence levels up. And that may well be a very accurate way of interpreting what a particular gentleman said. I'm not naming him, what a particular gentleman said. But the important thing is you do agree with the experts who say that at the end of the day, all countries will have a recovery rate which is equal and close to 99%. And that's an important point.
Whenever all the countries must have same level of maturity.
Absolutely. And that means it will take 2-3 years to get to that point, because these things can last a long time. Let me come to something else. This is again connected with recovery, but not directly in the way we've been talking. It's been widely believed, particularly in India, but internationally too, that young people and countries with youthful populations will withstand the virus better. But on the 20th of May, the ICMR released figures that shows that 48.8% of COVID deaths in India were people under 60. Yesterday, The Hindu published a survey done by the Integrated Disease Surveillance Program, which says that 78% of cases, not deaths this time, cases, are people under 50. And simultaneously, America has revealed that over 50% of the new cases are people under 35. Do all of these figures suggest that this belief that we had, that young populations can withstand COVID better, needs to be questioned and rethought?
No, I wouldn't know. Part of, I have not seen that data, and I have not, in last 6 days, I have been relaxing to some extent. So I was not on the job the way I would have loved to. But in this one thing which I would say, if I make a statistical uh, analysis based only on age groups and don't adjust it for the chronic morbidities that people could have, perhaps I am likely to make an error in judgment. No, my calculations could be wrong, and I'll tell you the reason. If you think in terms of India, India is very well known as diabetic capital of India. When it comes to cardiac elements, especially the myocardial infarction, we say that India is also a capital for these cardiac diseases, mainly because of our not so healthy lifestyles. No? You
And not
find
so
younger
healthy
people
food.
having myocardial infarct. You find young people having
Can I
diabetes.
interrupt? Are you therefore
Yeah.
suggesting, Professor Ganga Ketkar, that the fact that on the 20th of May, ICMR said 48.8% of deaths were people under 60, it's because these people had comorbidities. It doesn't mean that youthful people can withstand the disease less. It simply means that if they have comorbidities, they are likely to be in a problematic situation.
No, I do not know whether it was adjusted for chronic morbidity. It is possible
Okay.
that they could have had adjusted. They may not have. I must apologize that last 6 days I was out of
Please
action.
don't worry, sir.
So I have no idea.
You are entitled to relaxation after retirement. One last question before I take a break. On the 2nd of July, Dr. Balram Bhargav of the ICMR announced, and I'm quoting his words, it is envisaged to launch the vaccine for public health use latest by 15th August 2020 after completion of all clinical trials. And as you know, that's created a huge controversy. Subsequently, the ICMR clarified that actually all they were doing was to cut red tape and ensure that things could move fast. But that's clearly not what Dr. Bhargav said 2 days earlier. And the ICMR still hasn't clarified this date, 15th August. So, how do you respond to this controversy? I know it happened after you retired, but you are still connected to the ICMR, as you said. How do you respond to this controversy?
No, honestly, no, I come with the last part very clearly. I was not connected in last 6 days. Even if you look at the way you had to keep on calling me, I used to keep the phone switched off because it was extremely difficult. No, I just wanted to relax after a long haul of 6 months. But at the same time, I must also say that it would not be fair on my part to criticize without knowing the realities, without knowing why it had come, because the errors could come right from the words that were used to it is also possible that there could have been a reference to one more issue, that by 15th of August the manufacturing of the vaccine, because there are certain manufacturers who are also taking a risk of producing vaccines, they would lose their investment. But the fear is once the vaccine trials are over, then in those cases you should be able to provide the vaccine. The number of people
can I
who
interrupt?
require.
Can I interrupt?
Yeah.
The sentence, and it's gone around the world, was the following. It is envisaged to launch the vaccine for public health use latest by 15th August 2020 after completion of all clinical trials. That means two things. One, all clinical trials will be finished by 15th August, and two, it will be used on patients. And that's impossible.
Yeah, that I know. No, that I'm not disagreeing. But what I'm saying is, I don't know what was the context. I don't know where all the issues could have cropped up and why it came like that.
One other thing,
but it would be unfair for.
You worked very closely with Dr. Bhargav. Do you think he made a mistake? Do you think this was done under political pressure? People suspect that that date, 15th August, Independence Day, is a sign that the ICMR was being pushed so that a big announcement could be made on Independence Day. So, two questions. Do you think Dr. Bhargav made a mistake? And secondly, do you think it happened because he was under political pressure?
No, the first part I will say, I don't know whether you can call it as a mistake or whether the draft was overlooked at that point in time. I have no idea. because I didn't read it. Generally, people used to read the draft that he tends to write. So I have just no clue what exactly happened there. And on the second issue of political pressure, I cannot comment by any means. I was
Okay.
not there. So what do I say?
Let me put a last question to you before I take a break. Has this affected the international as well as national standing, the good name of the ICMR? Shahid Jamil, the chief executive of Wellcome Trust, said the following to the Indian Express: I fear the global scientific community would be laughing at us. Has this affected the standing of the ICMR?
No, let me put it this way. No, it's very easy to talk like this. No, that it is going to affect the credibility of ICMR. If ICMR's credibility was, so fickle that it can go to zero just because there is some small controversy around there, nothing has actually happened to that effect. I would wonder where we are. And
Okay.
second thing which I would say is, this was a feeling that I always had. I'm not talking against Shahid Jamil. You took the name. I didn't know what Shahid said. But the reality of life is, here in the panic, the outbreak that we are facing, everybody is becoming very critical. And everybody expects things to happen in an ideal manner.
Sir,
You have to face certain criticism, but as long as you are not lowering any standards, as long as you are not lowering your guard, I don't see any reason why it would have a long lasting impact. It would continue to remain as a smaller controversy that we had to face. I don't see it affecting credibility of ICMR completely.
ah, very interesting last words. It won't have a long lasting impact. You don't see it affecting the credibility of ICMR completely. In other words, you are accepting that there has been some damage done, but you're also saying it won't last for long.
No, the question is either you rely on or you accept the second letter, the second not letter. I think was it a press release, the
It was,
second press release,
it was a press
or
release, yes.
explanation, or the explanation, or you believe that the first one is right. No, the choice is yours. No,
Okay.
you can have your own opinion, but I think I would not believe that ICMR will go down as a bad organization anytime just because one small issue that has been raised, whether it is right or wrong, none of us know. But at this point in time, to say that it is going to affect long term credibility, perhaps that's a little exaggerated statement.
Thank you very much for that. I'm going to take a break at that point, Professor Ganga Kefka. When I come back, in a much shorter period of time, I want to talk to you about what strategies you believe the government and India's health ministry and the ICMR should hereafter follow, because we are virtually at 700,000 cases, growing at almost 25,000 a day. But first, a little break. Welcome back to a special interview for The Wire. My guest is the former head of epidemiology at the Indian Council of Medical Research, Raman Ganga Khedkar. Dr. Ganga Khedkar, in fact, Professor Ganga Khedkar, as he now is, retired 6 days ago on the 30th of June, but he remains connected with the ICMR. He's now one of their professors. Professor Ganga Khedkar, with nearly 700,000 cases, growing at almost 25,000 a day, and with the peak nowhere in sight, what's the right strategy for the country to follow?
No, right strategy is being implemented. What I would say is it needs to have either additional components
Which are?
or intensified efforts towards uh, implementing the current strategies. One of the things which I feel is equally important is we know that every metropolitan city has areas which have high population density. Now, whenever we find an index case, that is somebody who is found to be infected, we must make an effort to take out that entire family which may not be infected from that area to some other area where isolation or quarantine, whichever way you could call, ideally it should be quarantine. The quarantine for those who are negative can actually be followed really well. The infected individual could also be isolated, and therefore perhaps the risk of transmission can be reduced to a larger extent. And that is going to be an onerous task, which we understand in metropolitan cities, because the numbers could be higher where population density could be higher, and we may have to find different places as to how we would relocate them. The second issue which I feel which is very important is this is an opportunity for us to improve hospital infection control practices. Most of these people, finally, there could be people who may not be having COVID, but they are attending for some other reasons, are going to go to the hospitals. Now, if they are going to go to the hospitals, I must ensure that my hospital infection control practices are stringently adopted, so that these people also may not acquire this COVID-19. Because of that, I have to ensure that the way in which these outpatient departments are actually going to be managed, the way in which these people would be sitting in these outpatient departments, the way perhaps hospital infection control, which is practiced very well in intensive care units, but the wards also will have to have a
Okay.
high degree of hospital infection control practice. Now, if I can do that, that will also reduce the risk of spreading from one potential place where things could go in the same manner.
What about testing, Professor Gangakhedkar? At the moment, India is testing 7,224 per million compared to over 116,000 for Spain, over 154,000 for UK, and over 93,000 for Italy. And our population is 10 or 12 times bigger than the population of these countries. So what level of testing do you think India should achieve before you feel we're doing sufficient testing?
Now, if I understand well, before I retired from ICMR formally, now I recall there was an order in last 1 or 2 days which allowed people to test by themselves if they want to. So essentially, what does it mean? That now nobody can say that test will not be offered to me. They can go to a place and get themselves tested. So this offer of enhanced access to test COVID-19 testing is already there. I
Okay.
think it is people. No, people have to come forward to get themselves tested. One of the things which I also feel, as since you were asking about strategies, which we need to intensify is strategies to reduce the stigma that tend to exist with the people. And the reason is, this disease is one where people are so much afraid that if I'm found as infected, one of the worries I would have is nobody will visit my household, my family members will be ostracized, and in any case, if I'm going to die, let me die. 99% are going to recover. And if the person stays at home without testing, he is likely to spread into the entire family. I think it is time we need to reduce stigma at that level.
Okay.
The stigma that is associated with hospital admissions. Now, if I go to the hospital, I will not be able to meet my near and dear ones. If anything is going wrong, I will not be able to communicate with my family members. No, instead, why shouldn't I stay at home? Is another issue, which we need to tackle really well. I
That,
think stigma reduction strategies will help us enhancing the testing strategies really well.
that's very, very clear. Let me raise something that many people were surprised by when it happened. It was around the 17th, 18th of March that the Director General of the WHO, Dr. Tedros, said that the way forward was test, test, test. You remember it, those were very famous words, test, test, test. The very next day, publicly on television, Dr. Bhargav said, and I'm quoting him, This statement does not apply to India. It applies to Europe. It's inappropriate for India. Did Dr. Bhargav's views affect the level of testing that was happening in those early days?
No, let me put it the other way. In a hindsight, everything looks questionable. But let's look at the reality at that point of time. You will realize that we were having lockdown, low level of outbreak. Now, if test is a strategy, no, that was far more applicable to those where the outbreak has evolved to a larger extent, where the transmission has been occurring at a very rapid rate. But when you think in terms of country like ours, when you had a strategy which was limited to the most of the cases used to be either imported cases, so you could go for contact tracing and offer testing to those who required it, or the contacts of lab confirmed cases, and perhaps even healthcare workers who became symptomatic because the risk could have been higher there, and the cases which had SARI-like illness, which required testing because that could have been manifestation of COVID-19. I don't see why, even if this issue was discussed with any other person, no, as I said, I don't like names. No, perhaps anybody would have had agreed at that point in time. The
So
numbers were very small.
you're saying that in the early stages, I'm talking particularly of March and April, India's testing levels were not low and poor. You're saying they were understandable because the spread of the virus was very limited. Is that correct?
Yeah, very limited. And if you would have had left it to people to test anybody, who would they test? No,
Okay.
was this that anybody on walking on the street, if he says, I want to go for testing for COVID-19, at a time when even the kits were not so easily available, it was hardly a choice. No,
Okay.
you needed some symptoms, you needed his travel history, where the risk tended to be high. And that was what essentially was done.
Let's come to today. On Saturday, I interviewed Soumya Swaminathan, the chief scientist of the World Health Organization. Before that, she was Dr. Bhargav's predecessor. She was Director General of the ICMR. She said that an adequate level of testing in India would be achieved when the positivity rate falls below 5%. At the moment, as of yesterday, it's 9.97%. Do you agree with that view? It's not the number of tests, it's bringing the positivity rate down below 5% that is important, and you have to keep testing till you do it.
No, there is no reason why I should not agree with the description which Soumya was actually referring to. One of the reasons is very simple. You need lower positivity rate because then it tells you not only that the proportion of people who are getting tested is high enough, and the second thing is perhaps the infection is stabilizing to some extent. You may use other monitoring indicators to actually find out whether it is truly stabilizing or not. But you must remember that even if you are going to offer the test the way that we are doing today, that anybody could walk in and test, still, if the numbers are small, you need to have stigma reduction related strategies. People
Absolutely.
should come forward. Otherwise, you may have facilities. At no point in time, I can say confidently, while I was there in ICMR, one of the things which I can state is at no point in time the capacity was fully utilized even of public sector.
And
They
by
were
the
not.
way, that is also true today. Newspapers report that although our level of testing has on some days gone up to almost 250,000 tests a day, the capacity is said to be almost a lakh more. So even now, there is spare capacity that's not being used. People actually wonder, if you have spare capacity, why aren't you using it? We've got a population of 1.3 billion. Shouldn't we be stretching our testing to the very limit of our capacity rather than saving 1 lakh each day?
No, that is what precisely I am trying to tell you. No, we are looking at it from provider's perspective, but you need to look at end user's perspective. The end user needs to have stronger messages going to them, which will make them think that by going for testing, I might protect my family really well.
This is
No,
where
I'm
messaging becomes important. This is where
very important.
removing stigma becomes important. And let me put this to you. If messaging is so important, how do you respond to the fact that since the 11th of June, there have been no press conferences? How do you respond to the fact that top ministers are not talking? In Britain, just to take that as an example, the prime minister or a senior minister holds a press conference every day and he is flanked by the chief scientific officer and the chief medical officer because he knows that it's the two scientists who give assurance, but the prime minister ensures that people watch. In India, ministers are not communicating. A joint secretary level bureaucrat used to front those meetings while you attended them. And since the 11th of June, even those press conferences have stopped. So where's the communication? Where's the messaging?
No, it is very difficult for me to comment on why is as such, because I'm not privy to such decision making. Neither do I know of reasons why they are happening or they are not happening. But they were happening at a point in time. But I don't think when we think in terms of messaging, we are only talking in terms of messaging through press conferences. I think there is a different way of messaging. Messaging could be done by TV through advertisement. You could go into print media. You could use social media, which has become very important today, to reach people and try to communicate.
But
And what?
Professor Ganga Khedkar, even that is not happening.
No, see, one of the things which I'm saying is, it's only 5 months. The whole machinery is moving so rapidly that it's very easy to say this is not happening. But
Okay.
the reality of life is what has happened in such a short period of time is immense to think of for a new disease which we did not understand. Now,
Okay.
let me try to.
You're saying 5 months is too short a period of time for everything to be happening.
To ramp up,
You're saying
yeah.
give credit where it's due, don't criticize.
No, I won't criticize.
My last issue. On the 11th of June, the ICMR announced that they had done serological surveys in containment zones and hotspots. But the details of that survey have still not been made public. 3 weeks have passed. We're now into the 6th of July. The announcement was made 11th of June. How do you explain this silence?
No, I think now what is remaining is publication. No, the gist was communicated. When you communicate in, let's say, to everybody, you don't show each and everything. No, because it may become confusing. It's too long a presentation to show.
Forgive me, I'm not talking about the nationwide part of the serological survey. That was the one that established that as of end April, 0.73% of the country had been exposed to the virus. I'm talking about a second survey that the ICMR said they had done, this time limited to containment zones or hotspots. But the details of that second survey have not been made public. 3 weeks have gone since they announced it had been done, but we still don't know the outcome.
No, one thing which I can at least share, that they got delayed due to certain operational reasons in one or two places as such. So there was a delay. But at the same time, I can always say that there is no reason for people to believe that the information will be hidden. The information will come out, because otherwise there is no point in doing such kind of surveys. And I'm sure it will happen. The issue is we should just wait and have some kind of patience.
I'll tell you why people are asking, because a newspaper leak just before the 11th of June had said that the containment zone serological surveys had suggested that up to 30% of people in these containment zones could be affected. And people wonder, is that correct or wrong? And certainly, if it's correct, it would be a very good sign, because we would be a lot closer to herd immunity levels of 50-55%. But this leak has never been confirmed. It hasn't been denied. Can you shed some light on this possibility that up to 30% of people in these containment zones are affected?
No, I think it would be difficult for me to comment on what is described as press leak. The figures are, now I won't remember the figures exactly. The figures tend to vary, but at the same time, there are figures which are close to 30%. There is no doubt on that, which will come out in details. I shouldn't talk about it mainly because I will not remain accurate, if I was to recall in whichever way.
That is a hint you've given, which is very important. You don't want to speak unequivocally, but as you said, there are figures close to 30%, no doubt about it, and you also said this information will come out.
No, but not everywhere. Please remember this.
But in some
It's
places.
only in certain cities you find that the figures are closer to that, and that number is also very small, if I recall it correctly. So,
My last question. The World Health Organization chief scientist told us on Saturday that a vaccine is at least a year away. That being the case, there are epidemiologists in India. I'll name them only because it's important you should know who I'm talking about. Jayaprakash Mulil, T. Jacob John, who say that the best strategy for India is to enhance herd immunity whilst protecting the elderly and protecting those with comorbidity. That is the only way we can learn to live with the virus whilst we wait for a vaccine. My last question, how do you respond as an epidemiologist yourself to this viewpoint?
no, see, when you tend to rely on herd immunity, you should be willing to bear the costs of lapses that might occur and the mortality that comes thereby. One of the best ways to stop all that from happening is work towards both. To me, drug discovery programs also are equally important as even vaccine development program. If you hit the jackpot sometime, you might suddenly find that these rates, you won't have to wait for the herd immunity to actually occur and reduce the spread of this infection across. So I would belong to the second camp, which as a goal is a good thing, because you will keep moving, doing research continuously to try to find out whether you could have a good drug, whether you could have a safer and good effective vaccine, rather than just believing that even if I don't do anything, just protect, perhaps I would be safer off.
But
I think
surely, Professor Ganga Ketkar, the two can happen together. You can continue
absolutely.
to try and develop a drug, both therapeutic and prophylactic. You can continue to try and develop a vaccine, and at the same time, get the country working on the basis that we protect the elderly, we protect those with comorbidity, but the young, who will either suffer asymptomatically or very mildly, go back to work and keep the economy moving.
Yeah, but that is precisely what is happening. No, it is not that it is not being done. There are surveys which are being done in containment zones, house to house surveys, where they are trying to look at people with morbidity. There is a list that is being prepared of those people. You find that even those, they are being advised to stay isolated if you are old, less than 10 years old, pregnant woman,
Okay?
and somebody who has chronic morbidity. So
I'm
efforts,
delighted to hear that that is precisely what is being done. It's been a pleasure talking to you, Professor Ganga Ketkar. My congratulations on the chair you've been given. I wish your former colleagues at the ICMR had followed your practice of speaking openly, thoughtfully, and fully, because it would have answered questions that don't go away. It would have reassured people. You've done it. I'm very grateful to you. Take care. Stay safe.
thank you. Thank you.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.